Justin Williams of The Athletic joins us now. And Justin, it's been a long time. Good to see you, buddy.
How are you?
You wrote a column on The Athletic this week, an article about the ACC and this deal and how it might pave the way for what the Super League model would look like. What are your feelings on how much that would work out, and what constitutes a Super League? Are we just using that word because it's the easiest one? Because, like, Craig will say this, like, the real Super League is the one that's just brands. Like, that's just brands. But is this the Super League where it's not necessarily just brands, it just trims the fat of teams that just can't hang?
Yeah, honestly, this is kind of shorthand. Super League has become a shorthand for these. There was two prominent ones that kind of popped up last fall. One called College Sports Tomorrow, or the College Student Football League, and then there was one that was kind of called Project Rudy for this venture capital firm. And so, yeah, you can call them a couple different things, because I think you could also say, hey, if the Big Ten and the SEC just kind of poach who they want, maybe even trim who they want, that could be considered a Super League too. So you're really just trying to kind of shorthand what this would look like. But if we're talking about kind of a takeover, so it's not just the Big Ten and the SEC somehow staying connected to the NCAA and moving off on their own, we're talking about a whole other entity that completely removes football from NCAA oversight and basically starts a for-profit league. You know, kind of the most prominent one, this Project Rudy, is basically like a mini NFL. It's just the power conferences. So, you know, you're talking 60, 70 teams of the existing Power Four, and they go off on their own, and you can kind of keep the same conference structure, but then those non-conference games, you're not playing FCS schools, you're not playing Group of Five, you're getting more of those cross-conference big TV matchups. And, you know, this Project Rudy one, as an example, is kind of the most prominent, is, you know, says in their pitch that they're going to invest $9 billion in it. And so the reason why I think the ACC's move this week can kind of pave the way is because there's a lot of hurdles that have to be crossed. There's a lot of things that will have to happen for these Super League takeovers to take place. But the amount of money involved and college sports' recent history of just following the money makes me think that this is maybe now a little bit more of a possibility because of what the ACC did than, a couple months prior.
Justin, what was your, I guess, initial reaction when you saw the headline come down? I don't know if you were expecting it or not, but the news, and then when you, like all the rest of us, sort of learned more details in the following 24 hours of like, oh, wait a second, they're getting pretty much everything and more. What was your thought about just the end game in terms of who got what?
Yeah, there was definitely some rumblings that they were working towards a settlement. I think when ESPN picked up that option a couple months ago to, you know, officially extend the contract to 2036, the vibe was that they were going to settle. But the question was, what does that look like? And to me, the settlement is a clear win for like Clemson and Florida State or any ACC team that would want to get out of the conference. The fact that the exit fee drops to $75 million in 2030 and beyond, as opposed to whatever crazy 9-figure number it was going to be before, that just gives Clemson and Florida State a runway and a lot lower price tag to exit the ACC in 5 or 6 years if they want to. And so, yes, I understand why the ACC did it. They don't want to be in litigation with 2 of their flagship schools. They don't want to keep fighting this. They want to do what they can to, survive and continue on for everyone else in the conference. But when it came down that it's not only unequal revenue sharing, which is a win for Florida State and Clemson because they're bigger brands, but that exit fee number in 2030, that to me is like, basically it's the ACC picking short-term survival for what at least right now certainly seems like long-term definite, destruction for it.
Justin, how do you think the other leagues will maybe even start out by copying the revenue sharing model?
Yeah, so that was the biggest takeaway. I get what it means for the ACC, but if you're looking at whether it's Super League or just how this changes college sports when some of these other conference TV deals start coming up, I think kind of the unspoken thing hanging over those future deals was at some point Ohio State and Michigan in the Big Ten and Georgia and Texas and Alabama in the SEC, they're going to kind of start saying like, hey, we're pulling way more weight than some of these other schools when it comes to TV revenue. And now that we've completely disassociated from the amateur model and, covering Olympic sports, it's all, NIL and revenue sharing with players, like these schools are going to say, we want to get our fair cut. Basically, ESPN, Fox, CBS, they're not paying the SEC to show Mississippi State games or Vanderbilt games. They're paying it to show Georgia and Tennessee and Alabama. And so I think it kind of was an unspoken thing that at some point these power elite schools in these conferences were going to start saying, like, hey, we need to get our own cut. And I think the ACC, not that it wouldn't have happened without this, but the ACC kind of taking this plunge, it gives them a blueprint. It also just gives them an excuse to say, if the ACC's doing it, why wouldn't we do it? And then I think that can cause all kinds of upheaval or turmoil when these next contracts come up to be negotiated.
I know everybody now is looking at 2030 because that's when there's the big drop in the price tag. Do you think there's any chance that, like, a couple years in, Florida State will rally the private investors or the equity or whatever and say, like, we can wait a couple more years. We just don't want to wait a couple more years. Like, I think everybody now is like, all right, 2030, we got time. And I feel like, well, if we've learned anything, then like 2028, I wouldn't be surprised at all if like North Carolina's like, see you guys, we're going to pay $120 million and get the hell out of here.
Protect your online privacy with Nord VPN. Browse securely, access content from anywhere, and keep your data safe with military-grade encryption. Whether at home or on the go, Nord VPN ensures your digital freedom. Stay secure. Download NordVPN today at nordvpn.com. That's NORDVPN.com.
It's certainly possible. I think the biggest question there is, do they have a landing spot? Because so I think the Big Ten is 2030 when theirs comes up, right? I think the SEC is 2032. I think the college football playoff is 2031. So they're all kind of right there clumped together. But those conferences might say, like, we don't want to mess with renegotiating our existing contract. But yeah, if in 2028, maybe you start getting some seedlings of, all right, these schools in the ACC are now going to look for their exit when the Big Ten renegotiates their contract or when the SEC renegotiates their contract. And that's why I think the Super League, anything that would happen with kind of a distinct separate organization taking over, it couldn't happen until that early 2030 timeframe because of all these other existing contracts. But as they get closer and closer to that, that's where you might start seeing some teams say, hey, if we're going to start pushing for unequal revenue sharing, or if we're going to start poaching some of these ACC schools, what does that mean for the lower tier Big Ten and SEC schools? Maybe then you start getting a little more buzz of, all right, well, what if something else takes us over? And, the other part of this, which isn't the most fun, exciting thing to talk about, it is like the legal side of it. I know there's this House settlement coming up, but the NCAA is going to continue to have legal problems. These power conferences are going to continue to have legal problems, whether it's employment or collective bargaining or whatever. And part of the Super League pitch is like, hey, it'll be easier for us to deal with these legal issues as one single entity, dealing with Congress, dealing with the courts and things like that, as opposed to the Big Ten and the SEC and the Big 12 and the ACC all trying to figure it out on their own. So that's another reason that might start nudging people towards a Super League takeover, because it's like, all right, now it's out of our hands. We're out from under the NCAA, and another organization can deal with it.
Yeah. Do you think it's viable to have? I mean, right now the conferences seem too big as it is. Like, and we're only 1 year into that. Like, is it viable to have reasonably 24 team leagues?
It seems pretty ridiculous, especially you look at the way some of these conference races broke down, where they're unbalanced schedules. And so you're going to start having people complain, well, hey, Texas didn't have to play Georgia or Alabama this year, and another team did. I think that's going to continue to be a talking point. So, the other, not the Project Rudy, but that other Super League College Sports Tomorrow thing we talked about, theirs actually includes all of FBS, but they break it in, they get rid of the conference structure and they kind of break it down regionally. So whether it's that group or whatever kind of change happens, maybe you see the Big Ten and the SEC pull apart into like separate divisions or pods, again, similar to the NFL. Maybe they start kind of breaking down the way that these conferences are structured, or a Super League breaks it down. But I'm with you. It feels like at some point in this process, there's going to be a major reset. We've kind of done not half measures, but NILs happened, and now we're doing the House settlement and direct revenue sharing, and we've had realignment, and all these little things are kind of trying to address the issues in college sports, but not fully taking them and trying to do it all kind of in one fell swoop. I think if we do get to a point where that happens, whether it's the Big Ten and the SEC or another separate Super League takeover, I think you are going to have someone say like, all right, let's figure this out from a geographic standpoint or a much more manageable division, regional rivalry type standpoint. And that would kind of be part of the takeover.
So you mentioned the pitches by College Sports Tomorrow, also the Project Rudy. I know College Sports Tomorrow, you said in your piece, like they've tabled their discussion for right now, but Project Rudy continues on. So what do they do in the meantime, Justin? Like, how does that work? Is it still just going and meeting with, key stakeholders, kind of keeping it on the hush-hush? Do they just sit back and wait to survey? Kind of, if you're looking at that particular part of the storyline, is there anything to expect, or just they're going to be over in the corner observing, so to speak?
Yeah, I think it'll be, especially like the Project Rudy group seems very intent on kind of doing things behind the scenes and quietly. College Sports Tomorrow was a little bit more public, when it first got started last year, but as you mentioned, now they're kind of pulling back. I think part of that is because it can't really happen until the early 2030s. And honestly, which College Sports Tomorrow, Len Perna, the co-founder, told me, there's just so much other stuff going on with the House settlement and these programs kind of trying to figure out their way in whatever this new era of college sports looks like. It's hard to say, hey, if you have this big $20 million a year revenue sharing thing coming up in June, it's hard to talk to people about what's going to happen in 2030 and 2031. So I think it's one of those things where these super leagues, they continue to pitch to anyone that wants to listen. They kind of make their case, and they're moving methodically but slowly towards what they hope will be kind of a future when, as they get closer to those resets of contracts, that's when they can start maybe having more tangible discussions or changes. But I also think it's something that, again, we've seen the SEC and the Big Ten commissioners kind of dismiss those publicly, but I think they're going to continue thinking about it from their own perspective. What does this look like for us, when the early 2030s hit, and how do they kind of change and adapt to this new era of college sports?
Do you think they have at least conversations in their mind, like how do we tell Rutgers and Vanderbilt and all these other ones that don't fit our model anymore that the ACC will have great spots. They'll be thrilled. Like Boston College called us and told us personally, we would love to play you guys.
It'll be interesting to see how that part plays out, right? Because that's going to be like the kind of touchy aspect of all of this. I actually think it's more the Big Ten and the SEC are going to be on eggshells about what those top tier programs want to do, because for most of the Big Ten, for most of the SEC, they want to keep it status quo. Mississippi State wants to keep it status quo. Northwestern wants to keep it status quo. It's going to be Ohio State and Michigan whenever that shoe kind of drops, whenever they finally say, this has been fun, but we've kind of had enough of splitting this evenly with everyone else, and we want our own cut. All of a sudden, that is when you're going to have to start seeing whether it's these smaller teams push for, well, let's go to a super league because they're going to guarantee us what we were getting before, or the SEC and Big Ten kind of trying to figure out or justify how they can appease their top programs while still keeping all this together and, kind of keeping the money flowing as much as possible for those lower tier teams.
Yeah, I always think it's funny because, for example, the ACC model – this year, the team with the highest ratings is actually Georgia Tech. Like they had the one, they would have gotten the big bump this year if this was agreed to now. And that is what Florida State and Clemson in particular will say, like, hey, it could be Louisville. It could be you, Louisville. It could be, you never know. Duke, you never know. But all the schools that this does not entail, like, well, we know. Like, we know how it's going to be, especially considering that Notre Dame just told the ACC, hey, more Clemson and Miami and FSU. Like, like those need to be in the rotation. We don't need to go 3 years without playing any of them. Like, two on, one off every year. And look, I even see that maybe going to all three of them every year for Notre Dame, and then the other two games just rotate through the other 14 teams or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate thing, and, it's funny, like, I wanted to make sure to include in that piece, like, if you're a fan reading that or listening to this, and you're like, this sounds horrible, I hate this, I totally understand that. That is, totally fair and well within a fan's right. It's not like this is what it's going to be, so fans should have to accept this and take this. But for better or for worse, and I think you could point to a lot of examples where it's been for worse, college sports has shown it's going to follow the money, whether it's what you said about Notre Dame, like, hey, we actually just want to play Miami and North Carolina and Florida State, or whether it's conference realignment. And that's why, like, as maybe kind of far-fetched or far off as some of these Super League takeover ideas might seem right now, the money attached to it, I think, is too big to ignore that this could be the direction one way or another that the college sports is going to end up.
Well, look, if they go to 80 teams, right, and then like kind of trim some of the fat, I say that's wrong to say to the teams that don't want to be part of this, but if they just go to 80 teams and then there's a 2-tiered system, but Rutgers and FSU and Clemson and Oregon and everybody makes the same amount of money, that's probably more sustainable than what we have now. Right?
Yeah, or like the Project Rudy pitch is basically no one's going to make less, but it's all performance based. So if you play well and succeed on the field, now again, history would tell us that it's probably going to be the same teams that have succeeded under the previous system. But I think that's why it could be enticing, because these teams are going to say, ESPN reported with this ACC settlement that some of the bottom level ACC teams could see $7 million less in their revenue from the TV deal from the conference moving forward under this new system. This is at a time when teams are searching for more money for this revenue sharing house settlement that's coming up. So again, I think the idea could be enticing to those lower level programs, because they're going to say, well, at least if we do this thing, we're not going to be worse off. And then for those top tier programs, they're going to say, well, yeah, we're going to go and win our conferences and win championships or win playoff games, whatever it looks like. And then we'll be able to make more money because of that. So there are some things that I think will be enticing. It will take a lot of moving parts and a lot of hurdles to jump over. But again, if these teams are going to follow the money, then yeah, I think you're right. It's going to make them continue to look at this as a viable possibility.
Justin Williams of The Athletic. Justin, thanks a lot, man. Talk to you again soon. It's been too long between segments. We can't do that again.
Always love coming on with you guys. So anytime, I really appreciate you, Paul.
Yeah, Justin Williams of The Athletic here with us on 365 Sports.